So, I want to talk about a subject today that I think is very interesting because it is something that I could never quite put my finger on, but I'm realizing how much of the problem that I have with current Yu-Gi-Oh is stemming from this, and it's not something that happened overnight. It's something that actually has been happening since the very early stages of the game. Second, let me just apologize here for my voice. I am getting over God knows what. I am so sick. I can't even describe how sick I am right now, but Team APS made a video recently on APS Amplifier, and it's titled "I'm Tired of Yu-Gi-Oh! Extra Deck." And Paul made this video. Full disclosure, I like Team APS a lot. I like Paul a lot too. I think Paul has some really good takes when it comes to making the game more fun and the things that are currently making the game not as fun as it used to be. I tend to agree with Paul's takes a lot. And this is no different, but out of all his takes, I think this is one that I agreed the most with him. And if you asked me before, I probably wouldn't have been able to put my hand on it specifically what it was. So what Paul is saying basically is that the way that the extra deck works nowadays is there are too many generic monsters that don't require the engine of whatever deck they're being used to summon them. So you have like Chaos Angel, Baronne de Fleur, all these generic monsters that it doesn't matter what deck you put them in, you can bring them out, and ultimately the turn one board, the board will end the same way, and the boss monsters will all be the same. It doesn't matter if you're playing like a Blue Eyes deck, if you're playing a Dark Magician deck, if you're playing whatever, it's all gonna end on Borolo Dragon, Baron the Floor, Appaloosa, whatever it is. And that makes the game generic, and it makes it so the engine of the deck doesn't seem to matter, and that's kind of what he's saying. I'm gonna expand on that a little bit because I think it goes deeper than what's just on the surface that he's saying here. I think this is a problem that goes all the way back to like the fusion days. I've never been a fan of cards like King of the Swamp, Goddess with the Third Eye, all the hex sealed fusion cards. I don't like cards that replace other fusion materials and they can almost be used like this ace card that you just put in the deck and they fit anywhere. I don't like cards that fit in any deck unless they're trap or magic cards. I don't like generic monsters in general, not just the ones that are from the extra deck like Link, Synchros, Fusions, and XYZs. Those are worse, but not just those. I don't like any generic monsters that fit on any deck. I really think that much how other games do this, Yu-Gi-Oh! Should stick more to their archetypes, because what's fun is to play your archetype. Nobody likes playing soup decks, or at least most people don't, right? When you're playing an archetype, you're going for a specific vibe for the deck, a specific strategy of play, a specific gimmick. It's not fun to fill it with generic things that are the same as your opponent is playing, even though the engine is completely different. And I think that this problem, other than the early stages that I mentioned with King of the Swamp and whatnot, I think that this really started with Synchros. And I really like Synchros, but the problem started when we started having too many of these Synchros that they basically don't need specific cards from their archetype to be summoned. Like, we'll use as an example Stardust Dragon. Stardust Dragon doesn't need a specific tuner to be summoned. He basically would fit into any deck, right? As long as you have a tuner in a level 5 or whatever, you can summon him. I don't like cards like that. I don't like cards that are one shoe fits all. I think they ruin the game. I think they take away character and personality from the deck. And a lot of times you end up replacing the extra deck cards that were meant for that archetype and meant for that gimmick and that strategy that make it cool, like the boss monster being from that archetype, with some random boss monster that is the same thing your opponent across the table is using. I don't think that's fun. So again, the problem isn't inherently that, we should only use fusions and synchros shouldn't even exist. I think that synchros like Junk Warrior are a great example of this. Like, you need Junk Synchron to make Junk Warrior. That's fine. That's what there should be more of. Specific things, specific cards that are listed as the quote-unquote fusion material or the synchro material. I think that that's super important to not have these generic boss monsters that every deck uses the same of. I think the epitome of this was XYZs, and then Links are even more of an epitome of that. Like, the fact that you can just fusion, quote-unquote, any 2 or 3 monsters, just blow them out of the field and bring in some boss monster like Appaloosa, like SP Little Knight. The fact that you can just do that, I think it makes it generic, and it almost feels like you're playing always some sort of mirror match even though the engines of the decks are completely different. I think it robs the archetypes of their gimmick and essence and what they're trying to do, and ultimately it creates these annoying, unbreakable end boards that just look generic, and it seems like we're all going always for the same strategy, right? And I think that that makes things repetitive, generic, and annoying, honestly. I think that the game sped up way too much in the sense that I think it's too easy to synchro summon now. It's too easy to link summon and XYZs. Turn 1 boards are ending with like 4 or 5 boss monsters and these crazy unbreakable boards. Like, that is not fun. There's too much of that. Never in turn 1 should you already have an unbreakable board. That is one of the main problems with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! These generic boss monsters that just dominate any format and just replace any deck with any engine of their actual gimmick and whatnot, and just put in some random card that fits in on all decks, and we always see the same thing, like Baronne the Fleur, for example. And now we see more prevalently, we see a lot of Chaos Angel as well. I frankly am not a big fan at all of XYZs. I don't think they should exist. I don't think pendulum cards should exist, and I think that especially link cards shouldn't exist. And I tend to enjoy playing with link cards. But as time goes on, I recognize that they're part of a bigger problem, which I could never quite put my finger on. And I think Paul really hit the nail on the head with this, where he doesn't quite expand on it like I am. He's more focusing on the fact that we always end up on these boards that are these same generic, synchros or monsters that everybody uses, and everybody's board looks the same. But generally the idea is the same. Like, kind of the root of the problem is really the same, and I agree with his take as well. I don't think the problem is just that it becomes generic. I think that the problem is that there are too many transitions. Yu-Gi-Oh! Now seems to be a game of transitions, where most of the time where you're sitting and letting your opponent play for like 5-6 minutes and you're just watching, falling asleep while they endlessly do these combos, it's just transitions. There are so many cards where you never get to truly appreciate them or use them for what they're intended, because they're just being used as some sort of transition, as a means to an end, to get to some bigger boss monster, which ends up being some generic boss monster that every deck gets through. I saw this a lot with the new Heavy Samurai deck that I picked up, and I'm playing with it, and I got bored of it really quick because I hate decks that just are constantly cycling and transitioning between their cards to summon the generic boss monsters. Even though the boss monsters that Heavy Samurai summon are not generic, they tend to fit their own archetype for the most part. Just a continuous transition of cards that keep entering and leaving the field constantly, that's just boring to sit through. It's not particularly good for the game, in my opinion, and I don't think it adds anything. I think it just takes away from the gimmick of the deck or from the essence of what it was trying to go for. Like, if I'm playing with an X-Saber deck, I don't want to summon synchros that aren't X-Saber synchros. If I'm playing with a Blackwing deck, I don't want to summon Blackwings that aren't Blackwing synchros. I think that much how fusions tend to be restricted to cards that need to be in your deck, that should be the same thing for synchros, should be the same thing for XYZs, and should be the same thing for links. Like I said, I don't even think that XYZs and links should exist, but if they're going to exist, I think that they should work in a similar way. I think that they're super gimmicky, XYZs and links. I don't even know why they were ever invented or created. They just turned Yu-Gi-Oh! Into this game of massive transitions, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Now is kind of like a board-breaking game. It doesn't seem to be like a back and forth anymore, where I summon things, attack, you defend, you summon things, attack and defend, I activate a trap, you activate a spell. It's none of that. It's turn 1, you either draw the out or you don't. If you don't draw the out, I'm going to make an unbreakable board, and you either forfeit before I'm done with my combo, or you have the out to break the board, and you win, basically. It seems that all games are decided on turn 1 because of the vast majority being these generic boss monsters that can be summoned by any deck. And there's no variety in that strategy. There's no variety on the end board. And I don't think that's healthy for the game. And honestly, that's one of the reasons that I'm just on Dueling Book nowadays. I'm mostly just playing Edison and Goat for this being one of the main reasons that I couldn't quite put my hand on it. And now it makes a lot more sense, and I am kind of able to elaborate this opinion a little bit better. This is really why, like, I still play some Master Duel, but honestly, I get bored of it very quickly. Because I'm playing, oh, okay, turn one, there's 5 boss monsters, I didn't draw the out, forfeit. Oh, I make my unbreakable board, he didn't draw the out, forfeit. Oh, he drew the out or I drew the out, okay, I can come back and I turn the game and I win. It always goes down the same way, and it's always the same monsters. It doesn't matter what engine they're running, it tends to be the same generic boss monsters always. And I don't think this is limited just to extra deck, like Paul is saying. There are a lot of generic cards that aren't magics and traps that have the same effect on the game. And I think hand traps get a pass. I hate hand traps. I don't think hand traps should exist, but I understand that for the current meta and how the game works, they're necessary. But this goes for cards like Kashtira Fenrir, for example. He's just one example. One example of a card that I hate, I think is stupid, I think it should have never been created. Like Kashtira Fenrir was basically for a while there on every single deck. And he's a card that is a Kashtira monster. He should not be getting placed on every single deck because his effect is just so overwhelmingly good, and he can just be special summoned being a level 7 for no good reason, and his effect is so dominating and so powerful and so versatile that you can just throw him in on any deck and he works like a staple. Cards like that just shouldn't exist. And I think that honestly these design choices that Konami keeps making are just making the game more and more annoying and more boring. And Yu-Gi-Oh is at a point where it's like it's hard not to feel like black-pilled about it. It's hard not to feel like there's just no hope. It's like it's done. It's screwed. There's nothing that will ever make the game go back to as good as what it is. I've presented ideas on other videos, but honestly, the best solution is to stick to Goten Edison. And I've presented also my problems with Goten Edison. I think that Goten Edison gets stale because there's no new product being printed out for them. But honestly, at least to still stick to a time where Yu-Gi-Oh was fun, I mostly am just playing Goten Edison for that reason. Like, I can't stand the current game anymore. And I think this is just yet another reason that Paul mentioned that really makes sense to me, really resonated. And it's a big problem with the game right now. It just sucks, man. It seems that every year the game just manages to get worse. Every new collection, every time there's new things that get made for the game, maybe I'm alone here on this opinion, but I just feel like the game is getting progressively worse. And it's not like, oh, this set was bad, this set was good, this made the game better, this made the game worse. It's just there's no way to fix it at this point. It just needs to keep getting crazier and crazier, and I don't think there's any way to go back at this point. You know? It's just sad, man. Because it doesn't seem like there's a way to dial back on things a little bit, and the game just keeps getting less and less fun progressively, and that's really sad for something that I've been playing since I was like 9 years old and I really enjoy. It's just sad to see it continuously spiral downhill and become this generic mess.